BP added more than $70 billion to the U.S. economy last year by making investments from coast to coast. Investments like building charging hubs for fleets of electric buses in California and starting up new infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
The stress and crowds of holiday shopping can put a damper on your holiday spirit, and you don't always find all the perfect gifts you're looking for. The Virginia Lottery's games make easy and tremendously fun gifts for all the adults in your life, even you. Celebrate the season of gifting with Virginia Lottery Scratchers and online instant games. For more info, visit valottery.com/holiday. Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
Well, I'm sure all of you thought you'd heard The Last of Us, at least for tonight.
Today, yeah.
But there have been a spate of new filings in the Richard Allen case. And so we thought we would hop on and talk about them.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi murders. Prosecutor Nick McLeland responds to the Franks Memorandum.
Let's actually start with a filing that came earlier today, not from Nick McLeland, but from the media. I'm sure you all recall that recently the defense filed a motion saying they wanted to have cameras in the courtroom, not just for the trial, but for all pretrial proceedings. Earlier today, a media group filed into the case and basically said, yeah, that'd be cool.
Let us have that, please.
So that was that filing. I'm boiling it down to its essence.
We've talked a bit about the pros and cons of cameras in the courtroom. Kevin and I both support it because it leads to more transparency, and on a practical side can encourage a lot of people to stay at home and watch on their television sets, and might make it easier to navigate the courtroom when these different events happen. But the downside is they can certainly lead to a media circus.
And we're talking more about potential downsides in a minute.
Yeah, yes.
I'd like to say that generally speaking in this case, it feels to me, whether it's gag orders or what have you, attempts at secrecy or attempts to control the flow of information have not been successful.
It's like water. The water is going to find a way. You know, if you have a flood, the water is going to find a way into your house, and you can try to put up little barricades, but it's probably just going to go over it or go, you know, through the cracks or whatever. And I feel like that is sort of information in this case. And maybe the more you try to control it, the worse it gets.
In a way, it's kind of like when this country tried to ban alcohol. People wanted to drink. When alcohol was made illegal, people still found ways to drink. They just worked around the law, and generally speaking, that caused less respect for the law. I think the gag order and other means to control information in this case have been errors in judgment. Sometimes maybe we can say, well, I understand why they did this. I can understand the thinking behind it, but I think they've been unsuccessful and done more harm than good. And speaking of the issue of cameras in the courtroom, Nick McLeland filed his response to that issue.
Yes, he's filed state's response to defendant's motion for broadcasting order. So we're going to just read out a couple of the points from this filing that we think are perhaps most important. State would, of course, defer to the court's discretion concerning this matter and trust that the court will rule in the best interests of justice, but would notify the court that the state has serious concerns regarding the defendant's motion for broadcasting order and would ask the court to consider the following. First, the state would ask the court to consider that previously this court has expressed concern about extrajudicial grandstanding, which led to the issuance of the gag order by the court on the court's own motion on December 2nd, 2022, in response to the press release issued by defense. That the defense team has continued this extrajudicial grandstanding throughout their motions, including the emergency motion to modify safekeeping order filed April 5th, 2023, and most recently their verified motion for immediate transfer of custody and the motion for Frank's hearing with attached memorandum in support, all filed on September 18th, 2023. That the broadcasting of pretrial and trial proceedings create the same concerns, if not more, given that an attorney is immune from libel proceedings for statements made in open court. That defense counsel continues to use inflammatory language in pleadings, including statements that are simply not true, and there is no reason to think they will not continue to use supercilious language in court, designed as sound bites for recording on the national stage. For example, the language used by defense describing the, quote, conditions under which Mr. Allen has been forced to endure are akin to that of a prisoner of war. That the defense has filed its 136-page memorandum in support of the Franks hearing, in which only 13 pages refers to any allegations relevant to the question of a Franks inquiry. The remaining 90% of the memorandum outlines its fanciful defense for social media to devour.
Okay, so there's a few things that jump out at me.
Yeah.
One thing that, I'll be honest, actually made me smile was at the very beginning of the excerpt that you read there. The state would, of course, defer to the court's discretion concerning this matter and trust that the court will rule in the best interests of justice. But we wouldn't want to tell the court why you should do this. And that kind of reminded me of what he said at the hearing in June, where he stood up and said, well, of course, I don't really care if Richard Allen remains in Westville or goes somewhere else. That's not important to me. I know you do what's best, Judge, but here's why he should stay in Westville.
And a lot of it in that hearing was Nick McLeland putting forth the narrative from the state about, like, they're making stuff up and just kind of grandstanding. So that's been a consistent thing we've seen since the transport order. Defense will come out with something, makes a huge splash in the media. There's lots of discussion, debate, a lot of things for the public to kind of start sleuthing themselves. And then eventually McLeland comes back and throws some of it into question.
Well, also what I'm saying is what's consistent here is McLeland says, I don't have a position on this, and then very clearly takes a position and argues for it while saying he doesn't have one.
But it's interesting that he's not saying outright, don't have cameras. He's just saying, if you do have cameras, it
might be a huge mistake.
It might be a huge mistake because they're going to be lying on camera. So I think that's interesting. But I mean, then again, if we're going to say, if you're going to say that the defense wasn't really accusing Brad Holder of murder, I think we have to accept some nuance here. I think he's using these hearings and filings as a way to kind of hit back at the defense. It's a defensive, the prosecution is on the defensive with the defense, essentially.
And he's not holding anything back. He's saying the defense has continued extrajudicial grandstanding throughout their motions.
A lot of listeners reached out to us and said, aren't they breaking the gag order with this Frank's memorandum? Aren't the defense in violation of the gag order? The answer is no. What McLeland is saying here is that they're in violation of the spirit of the gag order, not Not the letter. They're following the letter. They're filing it in court. That's what they're supposed to do. But.
And I'm not sure I understand how something they put into a filing could be considered extrajudicial grandstanding, because it's actually part of a court filing.
Yes.
You could say this is grandstanding if you want. You can try to make that case, but since it's part of a court filing, I don't think it qualifies as extrajudicial.
I don't see how it does. I think the closest thing that you could say is that the portion of Nick McLeland's filing that gets into only 10% of it actually had to do with the legal matters at hand. That if you're inserting a bunch of fact into your filings that has nothing to do with the issues at hand, then that's where you get extrajudicial. But then again, it's not like they're just leaking that to people on the street corner. They filed it. So it's definitely the grandstanding issue, not even going to touch that, but the extrajudicial, that doesn't seem quite fair.
And let's also this is also something that seemed a little bit interesting to me, is, as you say, he said they did this Frank's motion, and frankly, I only thought 10% of it was relevant. And he makes this observation in a motion about cameras in the courtroom, where his opinions of the Frank's motion don't really seem to be relevant.
It's almost like all these attorneys are just fighting these stupid proxy wars and nothing has anything to do with anything. I think this is what fills me with such dread about this case, is that everything's just a circus. Everything's topsy-turvy. You're reading these filings and you're like, fellas, what are we doing here? Everything is just like some smoke and mirrors to get to some other irrelevant issue. I mean, you know what I mean? It's a very unusual case in that regard, I suppose. And I think it speaks to maybe some of what you're saying. When there's a gag order, people are fighting proxy wars, people are doing this. If Nick McLeland was able to come out and issue a statement being like, this is nonsense and here's why, then he wouldn't have to be doing it here. If the defense was able to come out and say, hey, here's our theory and here's why, then first of all, they would be subject to libel considerations. And second of all, they would potentially not be doing it in an irrelevant Frank's memorandum. So the gag order has basically forced all the issues to remain in court, which sounds great on paper. I get it. You don't want to try people in the court of public, the opinion. You want to have it be in the courtroom. But in this case, it just seems to be this, the kind of stupidity, smoke and mirrors has not gone away. It's just all happening within filings that it really has no business being in.
Yes. Basically, in this first group, he's saying if cameras in the courtroom, we can't trust the defense. They're going to say crazy things. And he makes it clear that he's still upset about things the defense said in the safekeeping motion, the prisoner of war language.
Yes. Now let's get back to his filing. That the defense has already moved for a change of venue, citing prejudicial publicity, and if the court were to allow broadcasting of pretrial hearings, that publicity would be pervasive and, as the defense notes, will be without boundaries given the worldwide interest in the proceedings.
So there he's saying, well, I know the defense has asked for cameras in the courtroom, but they don't really know what they're thinking. They haven't really thought through the implications because this wouldn't be the best interest of their client.
Well, a lot of defense attorneys come out against cameras in the courtroom, and that's because there can be prejudicial. We've seen something similar in Idaho, where the Idaho defense of Brian Kohlberger is saying, you guys are making him out to be a villain, you're making him look all sinister in your coverage. And, people make a big deal about the Delphi defense wanting cameras in, but that's another strategy. You're telling the world, we have nothing to hide. You're getting the media on your side. It's a brilliant strategy. I don't think it's an accident or they're being naive. I think that's what they want. They want to show the world, we got nothing to hide. Richard Allen is an innocent man. Look at him. He looks very sad here. I wouldn't be surprised if the defense, when they filed that, knew that Prosecutor McLeland would likely oppose it. Yeah, so I just think that's their strategy. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good or bad one, but I tend to think it's a good one, actually.
Should we get back to the document?
Yeah, let's go back to the document. that the state believes that the duty of managing the broadcast media is imposed on the court may become distracting, considering the number of media outlets that may request access to the broadcast, the fact that the judge is in an unfamiliar courtroom, the length and complexity of the case, the duty to protect jurors' identities, and the sensitive content that will be presented at the trial and pretrial hearings.
So he's saying, it'd be too much work for you, Judge.
Well, also, I think there's understandable concern about the sensitive content. I mean, we've seen some backlash against the defense for the Franks memorandum, just specifically because they went into such detail on crime scene and the mode of death for the girls. I tend to think that information would have been let, out eventually, but I think this is an emotionally charged case, so there will be issues around that to determine. I don't know if that's a reason to not have cameras, but that is fair to say. As for the number of media outlets, if they get a pool system, then it seems like you could actually keep some of the media outlets at bay, because you're basically saying it's a pool system, you all share the footage, go nuts.
And I don't think it would necessarily be a huge burden on the judge or her staff to keep sensitive materials shielded.
Let's jump back in. That the state believes that these hurdles may also have a negative impact on the participants in the proceedings and impair the dignity of the trial. That the defense has already expressed its intent to attack not only the evidence, but the credibility of those who investigated the case, which will allow the defense team to grandstand on camera about the imagined bad motives of the state actors. This is put on display in the defense's memorandum in support of the accused motion for Frank's hearing, where the defense spends much of its time disparaging not the evidence, but the state, the investigators, and other state actors. This does nothing to increase public confidence in the system. That given the layout of the courtroom, the state has concerns that with cameras in the courtroom, those cameras may broadcast the jurors, witnesses who are minors, attorney-client communications, and materials on counsel's tables.
Certainly we saw concerns about materials on counsel's tables being inadvertently potentially broadcast in some of the Idaho hearings.
This is a very small courtroom in my mind. There would be some concerns about what he's outlaying here from a just a tactical, logistical standpoint. How can you make this so you're not accidentally flipping over the camera and putting the jury on blast? And this courtroom doesn't even have a good AV system where you can hear the people speaking on the stand. So there seems to be some reasonable concerns there with how do we do it and not mess it up.
Right.
Because it's very easy for us to say, make it happen, people, but we don't know what goes into that. So, yeah, I can understand some of these issues. And I think basically saying, once again, reflecting the grandstanding, once again, indicating that the bad motives that the defense outlined in the memorandum are imagined and that they are essentially trying to burn down the investigators and the investigation, not in a way that deals with facts or evidence, but in a way that is, if we smear these people enough, then we can win with the jury. And that's basically how McLeland is characterizing the defense here.
Here's my thought on that. Let's just state for the moment as a hypothesis. Let's just imagine that what he says is true. I think a way to increase confidence in the system would not be to hide that bad behavior, but to expose it. And if what he says is true and they're going to be making reckless accusations, show the people those reckless accusations, show how the system responds to them and debunks them and moves on. I think when you try to hide things, again, for the purposes of this answer, I'm assuming that what he says about the defense is true. That's not necessarily what I believe, but let's assume for the moment that it's true. I think if you hide things, that creates in some people's minds the idea that maybe what's being said is true and that the system is afraid of that coming out. What do you think?
I think that's a fair assessment. And I think It's not a matter of, oh, we're having a press conference. Ultimately, Richard Allen's freedom is on the line. So if the state believes that he's the guilty party, then they have to be willing to go through the fire to get him. And if that means enduring what they're describing as highly personal and vindictive attacks, that is essentially what's the Cicero saying? If you don't have any evidence, like attack the witness, basically attack the person on the stand if you have a crappy case. Then that's part of the process. So that would be my inclination as well.
At the Murder Sheet, we spend so much time digging into crime stories that sometimes it's difficult to find the time to plan out and cook elaborate, nutritious meals. That's why we are so excited about our sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you go to factormeals.com/msheet and use our special code MSHEET, you're not just getting half off this high-quality meal plan. You're supporting us too.
So I'm obsessed with Factor. I had their creamed corn chicken and their tomato basil chicken risotto recently. Both were delicious. That risotto in particular was amazing. Plus, the whole process was a breeze. All I had to do was pop the meal into the microwave. The food was tasty and flavorful, which is no surprise given that each recipe is specifically crafted by chefs and approved by dietitians.
Having Factor during the hectic holiday season has been a boon, especially with us pumping out so many episodes. Head to factormeals.com/msheet and use code MSHEET to get 50% off. That's code MSHEET at factormeals.com/msheet to get 50% off.
Imagine all your audio entertainment available in just one place. That's what the Audible app is all about. With Audible, you can always find the best of what you love or discover something new. Audible has an incredible selection of mystery and thriller titles and originals, like Something Ain't Right by Roger Stringer and Zachary Stringer, The Space Within by Greg O'Connor and Josh Fagan, and the Audible original Moriarty. Membership includes access to Audible originals, podcasts, and tons of audiobooks that you can download or stream as much as you want. And as an Audible member, you can choose one title per month from an ever-growing catalog of titles to keep. The Audible app makes it easy to listen anytime, anywhere. Whether you're traveling, working out, doing chores, wherever your day takes you. New members can try Audible now free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/thrill or text thrill to 500-500. That's audible.com/thrill or text thrill to 500-500 to try Audible free for 30 days.
Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, FDA approved for over 20 years. So, talk to your specialist to see if Botox Cosmetic is right for you.
For full prescribing information, including boxed warning, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
Remember to ask for Botox Cosmetic by name. To see for yourself and learn more, visit BotoxCosmetic.com. That's BotoxCosmetic.com.
Let's get back to the document.
That cameras have never been allowed in the Carroll County Circuit Court during any proceedings, and the state has concerns about a case of this magnitude being the pilot case in which cameras are allowed to record proceedings. That the defense notes that the size of the courtroom lends itself to many onlookers, meaning that there is plenty of room for legacy press to attend and report the activities of the court, and in fact, the press has widely, accurately, and without incident covered the pretrial proceedings thus far without issue. There's no reason to believe that the media could not continue to effectively report to the public the pretrial proceedings and trial. It's true that the media would continue to accurately report. Love that he's given a shout out to the legacy press here.
What about us?
What about
chop liver?
Come on. But no, I mean, seriously, I agree with this aspect but I think a lot of the people in the legacy media would like there to be cameras because I think they feel that would give people more insight into what's actually going on. And it's a very small courtroom, and I kind of feel that it fills up pretty fast. And that's been a concern of ours. That's why we always get there early. And maybe if there were cameras, it would keep some people home.
And also, I feel we have said this dozens and dozens of times.
Many times. We're very repetitive.
And I will say it again. There's no sound system in that courthouse. And,
Nobody knows what's going on when they're in there.
And there's bad acoustics. When we got there last time for the June hearing, we were in the front row. And so even we had to strain to hear things. There were so-called legacy reporters in rows behind us who literally were in the room, not able to hear what was being said by witnesses and the attorneys, and who weren't even aware that it had been revealed, for instance, that Alan had confessed.
We literally, afterwards, we turned around and we're like, wow, what about that? And they're like, what? We're like, oh, the confessions. And they're like, he confessed. And we were like, oh, no. And no one can hear. So the courtroom has problems. And I understand and sympathize with the point that this is our first real big rodeo. This is going to be the time where we have to get it right, also with cameras. But ultimately, I think that's outweighed by the fact that if it's now allowed in Indiana to have cameras, this is as good a one to document as any.
And, frankly, the argument that this would be the first time any proceeding in this courtroom has been televised, and we don't want to have this be the first time where we work out the bugs. Okay, that's a good argument. I concede that. But you know what? It's September, and the trial is not scheduled to start until January. Why don't we get some cameras in that courtroom now and televise or record a few other cases just so we can get the bugs out of the system and have it up and running and working by January?
I tend to think that Carroll County is just strapped when it comes to manpower and people who know how to do this kind of thing. And I sympathize, but ultimately...
It would be the press. I'm sure if you told the press...
Do you think the press is going to cover some random... I mean, like, not to be mean, but like, we were at a pretty significant murder trial in Brown County earlier, and we were the only press there. Like, local media is ultimately, unfortunately, strapped. And if you could make some sort of arrangement with like press and TV to come in and try to cover some other case, then maybe, but I think it's a little bit difficult at times. I guess perhaps you could lure them in with like, this is the first time we're doing it, let's try it out. I don't know.
I think the people in the media who are offering to do some kind of a pool, if you went to them and said, we don't feel comfortable with the Delphi case being the very first thing, come in a week or a month earlier, test out your equipment, test out your camera positions.
On like a burglary trial or something?
And figure out what works and
Okay.
and show us that you can do it. And then we're talked. I think they would take that offer.
I would hope they would. Yeah, that's probably a good option. I'm just saying, like, it's sometimes I think a lot of this stuff is easier said than done.
Let's get back to the document.
That having cameras in the courtroom makes it difficult to have a separation of witnesses for any testimony that witnesses plan to give, and that the state is concerned that witnesses may inadvertently violate any separation of witness order due to the potential pervasiveness of media related to this case, creating issues with the admissibility or reliability of their evidence. That broadcasting the evidence out to the public allows for the potential of members of the public seeing gruesome images of the deaths of two little girls, while also seeing the toll that it takes on the family to see this tragedy play out in court. That allowing cameras in such a highly publicized and sensationalized case runs the risk of creating a circus atmosphere both in person and online, where 15-second clips taken out of context can race around the world in seconds, giving an inaccurate impression of the actual evidence and conduct of court proceedings. That the allegations that the fact that the families have voluntarily taken to social media and other media outlets somehow abrogates their right to privacy is unfair. The family used those outlets to help generate tips and clues so that law enforcement could arrest the person responsible for this. That is a far cry from having the family members on camera as they relive the worst day of their lives and see evidence of this nature presented to the court. Yeah,
Those, I think, are probably some of the most compelling arguments against a camera in the courtroom.
I concur. I honestly, that point number 19, which gets into the 15-second clips taken out of context, that speaks to my soul. I've become so incredibly jaded over true crime coverage and true crime media in general. And it's because I see what happens in this case, and it's because I see what happens online, and it's disgusting. And people should be embarrassed to do that kind of thing. But we've seen it happen in other high-profile cases. And unfortunately, I think that ultimately they can let cameras in, and it can be with the best intentions. But even as somebody who's advocating for cameras in the courtroom, I'm not going to act like that's not going to happen. That is going to happen. Because that is the nature of online discourse. That's nature. There's no repercussions for putting out crap and saying, ooh, look, Richard Allen frowned in this one instance. Let's make a TikTok about it. And, oh, he's looking down. Or zooming in on the families. And again, the worst day of their lives. They're having to relive that. Then they're having to see that looped on some idiot's YouTube. You know, it's a cesspool out there. And unfortunately, the cameras give these people, these content creators or whatever, what the kind of raw materials they need to put out shoddy, poorly made products so they can get a few pennies per click. And that's a fact. I tend to think the public's right to see this and the good that it would do to see this outweighs that. But I'm not going to act like that's not going to happen. I think that is going to happen.
I'm also concerned about witnesses seeing other witnesses' testimony and then perhaps tailoring their own testimony to fit what the other people have said.
How would you eliminate that risk? Would you just have people testify on the same day? Or I don't even know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm sure the judge would issue orders, but they'd be difficult to enforce. So yeah, the separation of witness thing is something I've always considered one of the stronger arguments against cameras. This is a stupid question, I know. For people at home, you can't segregate witnesses. You can't put them up in a hotel like you do a jury and tell them, give me your phone. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think you can. Well, I don't know. If you're a lawyer who knows, let us know. Well, those are some interesting points to this whole thing. I think, again, Kevin and I tend to be more on the side of openness of information, let the cameras in. There's some good points saying you shouldn't. From an emotional standpoint, I would say don't let the cameras in. But I think my intellectual side of being the public has such a vast interest in seeing this that should be allowed with caveats to protect jurors, obviously.
So let's move on to the next document filed, which is the state's second objection to defendant's motion to suppress.
So this gets into the prosecution's response to the Frank's motion, which at its core holds that Sheriff Tony Liggett lied to get the search warrant for Richard Allen's home, and therefore the search warrant should be thrown out and invalidated. A lot of the Frank's memorandum was about this defense's case, but at its heart, that's what they're asking for. Throw out the search warrant, Liggett lied.
So Anya is going to read a little bit of that.
The defense has filed such a memorandum outlining their beliefs of what was omitted and false. Once again, while the memorandum is colorful, dramatic, and highly unprofessional, it is not completely true. The state believes the allegations outlined by the defense are not supported by the evidence that they have collected. Sheriff Tony Liggett did not intentionally or recklessly omit evidence or lie about evidence in the probable cause affidavit to support the search warrant.
Again, say what you will about the defense memorandum, they went into quite a bit of detail. I'd frankly like to see more detail here other than he did not. In other words, explain, they said he lied. Here's why that's not true. Here's why he told the truth.
Yeah. I wonder if he's saving that for the Frank's hearing. But I agree with you. But I'm just saying, last time we saw the transport order debacle, it went a similar way. some sort of like hearing, some sort of filings that covered some things and not everything, and then a lot of in-depth detail in the hearing. I tend to think that the defense is certainly using the media. That's the way the Frank's memorandum was written, in my opinion. And I think it would probably behoove the state to use the media too in response.
Yes, I've never spoken a word to Tony Liggett. I don't know what kind of a person he is, or what's in his mind, or what's in his heart. But if what the state says is true and he is innocent of these things, and I would imagine he would like people to know that, and he would like to be defended and not have to wait until a hearing. And similarly, I know there was other people mentioned in the memorandum as being allegedly incompetent or lying, what have you. I think they singled out Jerry Holman. If what was said about those people was untrue, I think people would be interested in seeing details.
That being said, it is a pretty forceful saying. It is a pretty forceful statement that there's inaccuracies or untruths, or dare I say lies, in the memorandum.
McLeland then basically recaps the series of events that led to the issuance of the search warrant. In other words, they had an interview with Richard Allen and his wife, in which he admitted to owning certain articles of clothing and weapons similar to what was worn or used in the murders, and that basically he argues that that is enough to constitute a probable cause for a search warrant.
That's right. That kind of sums it up, I think. What do you think?
That sums it up, but again, I think we all have an interest in knowing more. The integrity of the law enforcement has been publicly questioned. I would like to get more information other than just an assurance it's not true.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think you need more when the defense is going into that level of detail. I think you need to have point for point. Let's see whose story stacks up. Not blanket no. I just think also from a media relations standpoint, you have to match what your opponent's doing in this situation. If I were to come to you, this is a very silly example, but if I were to come to you, Kevin, and say, you leave your books all around the house and you're buying all these books and it's filling up our house, and here are all these book-related complaints I have for you about how it's making our house unlivable. And you were to say, well,
what you say is not true.
No. I would want you to say, or some referee who's, I guess, arbitrating this domestic issue would want, I think, something that's like, no, I purchase a normal amount of books and I put them away where they're supposed to be put. And Anya, you leave seltzer bottles everywhere. You would want something a little bit more specific like that. If you just say no, it almost, it's not really quite what you would want in terms of the media relations side of things. Because I think it's just, people are going to conflate detail typically with the truth.
Yes.
Specificity with the truth as well.
Yes. That is 100% accurate.
And I do leave seltzer bottles everywhere, but Kevin also does have too many books, so it's all based on a true story.
There were a couple of subpoenas filed in addition to this. Basically, McLeland is asking for any medical or mental records related to Richard Allen during the time he has been at Westville, because he says Richard Allen's physical and mental state obviously is going to be an issue in the trial, so the state has the right to that information.
Now, we talked a bit about this last time. Does the state have the right to those records, or is this a privacy issue?
Well, I guess that gets right down to the whole
asking some very profound questions today.
Prosecutor McLeland is going to say, we have a right to this information because his mental and physical health is going to be at an issue. If you're going to argue that his mental health broke temporarily and he had some sort of breakdown,
and that's why he confessed,
then if that's one of your defenses, then we as the state have the right to information, so we can either say, oh yeah, that is accurate,
okay,
or no, that's not accurate, and we should be able to rebut it.
That actually seems fair to
That's
me.
what he would argue. The defense would say his physical and mental health records are private and shouldn't be shared without his consent.
I think that argument holds more water if the mental health has nothing to do with their defense of why the confession happened.
Right.
And it's interesting because the memorandum does not really touch upon the mental health issue to me.
The memorandum suggests that the confessions were not the result of his mental health breaking or him having any sort of an episode, but rather because he confessed because he was threatened by guards.
And they're also clarified that they did not hear that from him in a footnote, but that is just something.
They're just putting it out there as a
they're
possibility.
Just throwing ideas around. I think that was a pretty interesting footnote. But it also kind of keeps it away from like, no, there's a rational reason for this to happen, so it's not his mental health. I think early on when we were reporting on this, we had a lot of mental health experts, and they spoke about the difference between insanity, not guilty by reason of insanity, or versus incompetent to stand trial. Ultimately, we know that Westville mental health professionals evaluated Allen and determined with him that he did not need to be forcibly medicated, and that seemingly his behavior returned to a level of normalcy after that. That seems like a telling episode.
Yes.
That he did not need forcible medication. And it also seems telling that the defense is laying out a scenario where he can be totally sane, not having any sort of mental health issue. But in that scenario, maybe he confesses for a strategic reason to protect his wife from Odinus.
Yeah, and I mean, you can spitball lots of ideas why a person might make a confession that's not true. Let's move on and discuss. There was a couple of other filings that Prosecutor McLeland made.
Oh yeah, the hidden filings
that we are not privy to.
The off-limits filings.
There was a petition filed that was a verified request to prohibit public access to a court record, and that is what an attorney files with any document that he wants to keep sealed, basically. And then the thing that he wanted to keep sealed is a motion that is a motion for all future pleadings and filings to be sealed for the court's review before being released to the public.
Yes. And I think if you're like me, you're a lay person and not involved with the law, you'd probably be surprised by how much freedom attorneys have to just file into this case and file what they want, right? And I think that's something that's normal for you, Kevin. But I think a lot of people are like, wait, why are they just allowed to put out the names of people that the defense thinks did it in a filing that's allegedly about Frank's issues and go on for 100 pages on that before they get to this? And it's because they can do whatever they want. And what McLeland's asking is, maybe we shouldn't be allowed to do that. Yeah, maybe there should be some oversight.
Throughout McLeland's filings today, I think there's certainly an undertone of, would disgust be too strong of a word?
Oh, no, that's not too strong of a word. Disgust.
Disgust and maybe outrage at what he calls the defense's
grandstanding. Grandstanding and putting out misinformation, essentially. And it's basically like this is becoming a circus, which I would agree with in the sense that it is becoming a circus, but I think unfortunately this case has always been a circus. I don't think it's ever not been a circus on some level.
And if he wants to create a situation where court filings from the defense can only be seen if the judge approves it, I think the optics of that would look bad. I think in some quarters, there's already some conspiracy think, and those people wouldn't have their faith in the system restored if they start thinking, well, there's only certain parts of Richard Allen's defense that we're allowed to see. What are we not allowed to see? The truth.
I tend to think that you don't make decisions in an important case based on what the dumbest people on the internet are going to do or not do. I mean, if you're very far into the conspiracy theory think camp or whatever you want to, if you're already far into the conspiracy theory camp, there's no reaching those people. And frankly, like, let them go. They're like, as long as one of them doesn't end up on the jury, it doesn't matter. That being said, I tend to think just in the terms of everyday people who are acting in good faith and watching and with interest from home who may be confused. I think if you want to speak to those people, attack with facts and sunshine, not trying to, basically have everything be more secretive. So I'm not saying this based on what the conspiracy cranks think. They're lost to us all, and they should just go and have their little circle, on whatever, little online.
Sunshine is always the best.
I would say, but for the normal people who are like, what's going on? Like, let them know. I think Nick McLeland had a very good performance at the last hearing we went to, where he went back against some of the defense talking points. I think ultimately that was Nick's day, because he was able to specifically dismantle a lot in a short amount of time. So I tend to think that approach for both sides, keeping it in the sunshine, tends to be better. That's just my take.
Yeah, I think the gag order was an error, and I think future efforts to control the flow of information would be an error. You can't have a judge write something and sign it, and then suddenly everybody behaves according to the Marquess of Queensberry rules. Behavior is not going to change, and the interests of people in the case are not going to change.
If the defense has decided that the Marquess of Queensberry rules don't suit their purpose in this case, I agree. You're not going to tame them by doing anything that's just hiding stuff. The only way to do it is combat them. You don't try to say, like, let's just have the fight in a dimly lit back room that nobody can see, because then I think people are going to be saying, well, I think you're concerned about losing that fight. Yeah. And I think that's ultimately, when we're talking about optics, when we're talking about media relations, I think that's where we are with this, and that's where the sunshine is helpful. Well, we'll keep you all updated on whatever else wild stuff happens in this case.
And you'll hear from us at least once tomorrow with our regularly scheduled Tuesday episode.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.